The snow fell silently in the early hours of a winter morning, blanketing the world in white. In a small, creaky house at the edge of town, Emma stirred her tea and stared at the towering piles of boxes in the attic. It was the third day of her visit to her grandmother Margaret, who insisted the attic had to be sorted before the memories faded away forever. Emma climbed the wooden ladder, her breath forming tiny clouds in the cold air. The attic was a treasure trove of her family's past, a patched quilt draped over a rocking chair, old dolls with faded faces, and stacks of yellowing newspapers dating back decades. But among the clutter, something unexpected caught her eye. A small wooden chest, intricately carved and covered in dust. Emma hesitated before opening it, her fingers brushing over the delicate carvings. Inside lay a single letter tied with a lavender ribbon. The parchment was brittle, and the ink was faded but legible. Her heart pounded as she unfolded it and read the first line, "My dearest Lillian." The words poured out like a confession of the heart. Edward, the author, wrote of a love so deep it defied distance and war. The letter spoke of his hope to return to Lillian after the war and of his dream to build a life with her. But the final line struck Emma most. "If you are reading this, Lillian, know that my love for you is timeless, even if fate is not." Emma's breath hitched. She didn't recognize the names, but the love in the letter was palpable. Why had her grandmother kept this hidden? Emma hurried downstairs, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. Margaret sat by the fire, knitting a scarf and humming softly. When Emma showed her the letter, Margaret's hands stilled. "Where did you find this?" Margaret whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "In the attic." "Grandma, who is Edward? And who was Lillian?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the fire. "Edward was my mother's true love," she finally said. "He went to war, promising to come back, but he never did. She waited for him for years, kept that letter close to her heart, but eventually she had to move on." Emma's throat tightened. Did she ever know what happened to him? Margaret shook her head. The war swallowed so many lives. His name was never on any list. It was as if he disappeared. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She couldn't shake the feeling that Edward and Lillian's story deserved a proper ending. She spent hours researching, poring over old war records and archives, following every clue the letter and an accompanying photo offered. Weeks passed before Emma stumbled upon an article about soldiers who had been declared missing but later found in remote hospitals. One name stood out: Edward Fletcher. Her heart raced. She contacted the care home where Edward had been, only to learn he had passed away 2 years earlier. But among his belongings was a box labeled Lillian. Emma visited the care home and was handed the box. Inside were letters Edward had written to Lillian, but never sent. He had survived the war, but suffered memory loss. By the time he recovered some fragments of his past, too much time had passed, and he couldn't find her. Emma returned to her grandmother, the letters in hand. Margaret sobbed as she read them aloud, her voice trembling with every word. "She loved him until the day she died," Margaret said. "Now I know he never stopped loving her either." The family decided to hold a small ceremony in honor of Edward and Lillian. Under a tree in the yard, Emma buried the letters and planted lavender in their memory. As the sun set, a sense of peace washed over her, as if Edward and Lillian's love had finally found its way home. The air was crisp, and the trees blazed in shades of orange and gold as William settled onto the old bench in Maplewood Park. He straightened his scarf, his eyes scanning the familiar path. As always, he was early. He pulled out his pocket watch and smiled. Any moment now, Sarah would appear. Their meetings had begun 3 decades ago on this very bench. William had been grieving the loss of his wife, and Sarah was reeling from a broken engagement. A chance conversation had turned into hours of shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. Before they parted, Sarah had said, "Let's meet here again next year. Same time, same place." And so the tradition began. Each year brought new stories to share. Some years were filled with triumphs. Sarah's gallery opening, William's grandchildren being born. Other years were heavy with loss. William's health struggles, Sarah's heartbreak over her father's passing. Yet, no matter what life threw at them, they never missed their autumn rendezvous. Their friendship deepened, but an unspoken tension lingered. Both of them knew their connection had grown into something more, yet neither dared to cross the line. It was enough, they told themselves, to have this one day each year. One year, Sarah arrived at the park to find the bench empty. She waited for hours, the autumn sun dipping lower in the sky, but William never came. She returned the next day, her heart heavy with worry. Still, he didn't appear. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah feared the worst. But just as she was beginning to lose hope, a young man approached her, holding an envelope. "My grandfather wanted you to have this," he said. The letter inside was written in William's familiar hand. He explained that he had fallen gravely ill and couldn't make the journey to the park. The letter detailed how much their yearly meetings had meant to him and confessed what he had never dared to say aloud. "I have loved you since the moment we met." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she read the final line. "If this is goodbye, know that you were the autumn of my life, the season I cherished most." Sarah returned to the bench every year, holding on to William's memory. She read his letter under the falling leaves, feeling his presence in the crisp autumn air. One day, an old friend of William's approached her with a gift, a journal filled with William's musings about their meetings. It was then that Sarah began writing her own entries, documenting the years they had shared and the love that had grown between them. She spent her days honoring his memory, finding comfort in the knowledge that their love, though unspoken, had been real. When Sarah passed away, her journal was found on the bench, tucked between the pages of William's final letter. The townsfolk planted a maple tree beside the bench in their honor, and every autumn its leaves turned a brilliant gold, a testament to a love that transcended words and time. Which story did you enjoy the most tonight? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. I'll see you again tomorrow at 7 p.m. for more cozy tales. Sweet dreams.